My mom was not so enthusiastic about my dad's choice of games. She felt like maybe poker had ramifications that were lost on a 6 or a 7 year old. I'll admit though that blackjack is really effective at teaching basic addition. It's You have cards 1 through 11. The rule about the aces being either 1 or 11 was a little bit confusing to second grade me, but it covers adding all of the basic numbers, all the 1 digit numbers. So if you have a kid who is struggling with addition and they don't want to go the memorize the addition tables route because that's boring and kids don't enjoy it, try card games. You could even go for a simplified version that gets rid of all of the face cards. And then you would just have 1 through 10. You could get the tens as well. Focus on 1 through 9. Of course, then it would be 18 and not 21, but that's fine. It's not like the children care whether or not you're being authentic to the casino version. And you would lose the gambling stigma as well. And that's about whether or not you should teach children about gambling at 6 years old. I don't know if anybody's ever actually studied that either. Now, what studies have shown is that games of chance become more addictive the more the people playing them value what is being bet. As a, for instance, going to a casino and betting real money, if you have a personality that is weak to addiction, if, uh, if hitting a blackjack and doubling your money is a very successful attack against you, right, then betting something you don't care about, like if you have a weekly poker tournament with your friends and you only play for chips and not for real money, that will tend not to have the addictive properties. Same thing for video games. So loot boxes comes up a lot as to whether or not it's gambling. And the answer is it depends on how much the person opening the loot boxes values the potential contents. If they value the contents the same as they do real money, then it's absolutely gambling. If the contents of the boxes are things they don't care about at all, like I was going to say nice to haves like cosmetic items, backpacks, hats, skins, different color schemes, stuff like that. But there are people out there who take their cosmetic items very seriously. Yeah. If it offers things you don't really care about that much, then it's not gambling, right? Particularly if it's things that have no real world value. Real world value. I'm having a lot of trouble with R's lately. Yeah, the only real benefit I can see, well, actually, I can see two benefits to introducing the idea of gambling. If you're doing it for counters or chips or buttons, and they all go back in the box at the end of the game, so there's nothing at stake, right? That's a good way to teach basic counting and addition and subtraction. You switch that up, play for candy, right? That's something a lot of children value quite a lot. So that might drifting into actual gambling territory. And what I don't know, and I'm not going to create an uninformed opinion on, is whether gambling is or predilection for gambling addiction is an inherent trait or a learned one, right? Because if it's a learned one, then you probably want to avoid any actual gambling as much as possible with young children. If it's inherent, then trying it out might teach you whether or not this is something you're going to have to look out for in the future. But I don't know the answer. And in this case, I would say waiting to find out is probably safer because it's unlikely that your 10-year-old or even your 15-year-old is going to run into a major gambling addiction. As compared to if it is a learned behavior, it's definitely not something you want to encourage early on. That could turn out quite badly. I wonder if anybody's researched that. It would be quite difficult because you could really only do retrospective studies, right? You can't take two groups of children, a control group and a research group, and subject the research group filled with young children to intense gambling scenarios for an extended period of time and see if they turn into adults with addiction problems. That's not even a little bit ethical. There's there's no there's no research institution probably in the world at this point, and definitely not in the United States, where a plan like that would pass ethical review. So you would have to go out and find you would have to take a large sample of the general population, and you would have to give them surveys and ask questions to identify whether or not they have gambling problems, and questions to identify what age they started gambling at. And then you would have to do a whole bunch of statistics, and you would come out with an answer that would tell you not whether or not starting early causes problems later in life, but whether or not the same people who started early have problems later in life. But it's correlation as compared to people who started later in life. And if you got roughly the same percentages for people who started early and people who started late, then that would tend to indicate that early development is not a factor, that it's some sort of inborn trait. But it would be really difficult to prove. You would, the most likely outcome is that you would gather a bunch of data and not get a definitive result. Right? Even about the correlation, forget about the causation. You're never going to prove causation on something like this because that would be totally unethical to try and cause gambling addiction. But even seeing if the two things are correlated, chances are the data you'd get back would not tell you anything. You might actually, there might be a more productive path of research actually on this topic. If, and I'm not sure whether or not there is, if there is an actual difference in the brain activity of people who tend towards gambling addiction, then we could potentially do scans on children and see at what age those abnormal activities develop. Right? And if they develop at a young age, even with no exposure to gambling, then we could conclude that it's an actual brain development issue. It's physiological and not based on learning the concept of gambling. Yeah, that would be quite a difficult study to design ethically. Even the brain scan part, it would be. Also, it's kind of annoying finding child research subjects. Uh, you have to be very careful when working with children. Lots of lots of ethical considerations there. Also, most kids don't like to sit in an fMRI and have their brain scanned. That's not something a typical 5-year-old enjoys. It's boring. It's noisy. It's not fun at all.